Hey there guys, welcome back to the channel. So my name is Shivank and I'm currently a third year medical student at Imperial College London, and today's video is all about top tips for how to score really well in section 2 of the BMAT exam. So this video is split up into 3 different sections. I'll firstly be talking about how I revised for the BMAT exam and what resources I used. I'll then be talking about useful strategies that you guys can implement in order to save time in the exam and score as high as possible. And finally, I'll be talking about important strategies, as I mentioned, such as reading the question carefully and also give an overall summary and conclusion for you guys. So without further ado, let's get started. So firstly, the BMAT Section 2. So this is an exam that encapsulates GCSE level chemistry, biology, physics, and also maths. And so it's really important to get a good grasp of all of these. And now the best way that I think that you guys should do, and what I did personally, is look at the Cambridge University Guide. I think this is really helpful because it tells you an overview of every single topic. So let's say within physics, it tells you need to know conduction, convection, radiation, so on and so forth. I think that's really great because this prevents you from revising stuff that you thought was necessary but actually isn't being tested on in the exam, and also the same for knowing what is going to be tested on, so you can really utilize your time best this way. Secondly, once you've done and had a look at the Cambridge University Guide and just familiarize yourself with that, I would then use something called a CGP guide, which you can see on the screen here. So this is something that I had when doing GCSE level, and it's basically a basic understanding of all the contents. And I think that's really great because once you have a basic understanding of the content, you can then apply it to past papers later on nearing the BMAT exam. And so that's why I'd highly recommend. There's also other books that I haven't heard of. If it gives a summary of the GCSE level that you had learned before, I would highly recommend you doing this as well. And another thing to mention, so for me personally, I did maths, chemistry, biology for A level, and many people might not have done maths, or many people might not have done physics. And so it's really important that you strategize which one is your weakness. So for example, since I didn't do physics for A level, I had to spend more time doing physics GCSE. And I think that's perfectly fine because at the end of the day, the more time you put into subjects that's weaker, you'll get an overall better outcome. And so I would definitely recommend knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are and whether you want to highlight this. And then finally, with the CGP guides, it covers everything in your course. So let's say if you did EdXL, it would cover all about EdXL. However, this leaves out other examples as well, such as OCR, AQA, etc. And so once you've looked at your guide, whether it's EdXL or whatever, I think it's really important to supplement that with further learning. So after you've done it, let's say you know now 80% of physics, but there's still that 20% from an exam board which you haven't learned. And then you can use Medify. I think it's really great even for BMAT because it has some lessons which you guys can use in order to learn more about the things, that topics that haven't been covered, whether it's something related to plants and biology or something more complex. I think it's really important that you don't miss out anything in your learning. And so quickly summarizing, make sure you look at the Cambridge University Guide. After that, make sure you use your CGP books, and then finally supplement that with your Medify learning, and then you'll have a really good foundation base from which you can do past papers. So now we've talked about resources, let's talk about what to implement when revising for the exam. So for me personally, I revised a month before the BMAT exam, and this is also when school was starting. So I was complementing my work with school and then coming back and then revising for the BMAT exam. And I think this really worked out great for me because I started off at the beginning, as I mentioned, using the Cambridge University Guide, and then I did the conditions and everything for around 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, I had a solid foundation of all the topics because I didn't really need to spend as much time in biology, chemistry, and maths since I already did it for A level, and only had to spend most of my time with physics. So after 2 weeks, when I had a good foundation, I then really made the use of Medify. So Medify has a lot of past papers available, and so when doing past papers, I was able to just use the strategies that I implemented, and specifically for section 2. And I think this was really great. They have lots of resources that you can also practice with, and then I was able to really do well. And then when doing section 2, I realized one issue: the timing. The timing was something that was really, really difficult for me to do because of how many questions there are in such a short amount of time. I believe you have to, I would want to spend less than 1 minute per question, so I have a decent amount of time to check. And that's perfectly fine. At the beginning, you will struggle with timing, but that's how it is. And then the more you practice, the better you get at it. And I think what's really great is always have that in the back of your mind. If you know that the timing is going to be an issue, you'll try and answer the questions quicker and more effectively. Another top tip for this is have a look and read the question properly. Once you have read the question properly, you then have an understanding of whether whether you've learned the topic, if you have not learned the topic properly, or if it's something that's not as fresh. Secondly, let's talk about the useful strategies that I implemented when revising for the BMAT exam. So firstly, I think it's really important that you spend around 2 weeks just learning everything as I mentioned. So using Cambridge University Guide, CGP and the Medify Learning, I think within 2 weeks you'll have a good understanding. This is because you might not need to focus as much time on biology and chemistry and mainly focus on either maths or physics, which I think is great. Then after 2 weeks, I think it's really important that you use your learning and then complement it with past papers. And this is where Medify comes into play. So they have lots of past papers available on the website and lots of questions to practice from. And so by doing this, I was able to feel more and more confident. And then towards the exam, so let's say 1 week or a couple of days before, I was able to do many more past papers. And so I had a good understanding of what I was doing and what I was going to get into the exam. And I'll get onto that as well. But I think it's really important that when you start off with past papers, do not do it in timed conditions because you will end up scoring quite low, and that's perfectly fine because you haven't learned how the questions are asked. So with the BMAT, they really like to trick you with a lot of questions. So let's say the question says, which of the following is invalid? Or which of the following is most invalid? And if you read the answer options, let's say the first one, you're instantly like, this is invalid, I'll definitely pick this one, and then you move on. But the key is reading the question. If it says most invalid, that means there could be more than one that's wrong. And it's important to look at all of the options in this case and see which one is most applicable to the answer, so i.e. the one that's most invalid in this case. And that's why I think reading questions is very carefully and a skill that you should pick up on as quick as possible. This is because when doing the exam, it's quite easy to fall for simple tricks, and I believe I did fall for that once or twice when doing practice papers. But then the more and more I saw it, the more I was able to pick up on these words and avoid this in my actual exam. So I think that's a really good structure. The idea, once you've learned it, you can then do past papers. And another thing is, let's say you're getting a topic consistently wrong, let's say conduction in physics. Then what I would say is go back to the learning that you did with CGP, or like you can watch a YouTube video online, as YouTube is a great resource, and then complement that with your learning, because you clearly haven't learned it well in the first place, so then it's really hard to answer questions. But if you go back, learn the topic again, maybe try a different angle than the one you took, then you're able to score really well in the exams afterwards. So thirdly, let's talk about something that I wish I did differently in my exam. So on the day of your exam, it's perfectly normal to feel nervous or anxious. And that's exactly what I felt in my exam. So my year was different to many other years in the sense that I did it online. I think it was the first year they were trying this out. And I think that was a great experience because I had been practicing that way. So for you guys, I believe it's going to be in paper. So I think it's really important that you practice on paper. Do not practice online because then you will get it'll waste some time because you haven't written like that answers options quickly compared to the actual exam. So get used to the actual style of the exam. But secondly, the more important thing is on the day of the exam, I was feeling really nervous and anxious. And so when doing the exam, there was a lot of questions that I was just flagging because I simply didn't know the answer and just moved on. Whereas in reality, I think I did know the answer, but I wasn't confident enough with myself. And I think that's fine because on the day of the exam, you will feel nervous and you will flag a lot more questions. I think that's what may have affected my score slightly because I felt that I was flagging a lot more and didn't actually know my stuff. Whereas in reality, when I got my score, I knew that the hard work had paid off. And I think it's really important with the BMAT is that you'll see yourself getting a consistent score nearer the end of the exam. And what I mean by this is towards the end of my exams, I was always scoring 6.0s or around 5.9s, around that ballpark in section 2, like consistently throughout the last week of practice. And I think that's really great because in the actual day of the exam, obviously a slight reduction, but I ended up getting 5.7 in section 2, which I think is a really great score. And it's really important that whatever score you get is perfectly fine because at the end of the day, you still had the UCAT to give, and there's also different universities that can accommodate you depending on whether your BMAT went well, your UCAT went well, so on and so forth. And so it's really important that you just don't look at the end result, but just keep working consistently, and then you'll be able to find in the exams. So let's summarize this video. So the contents of this video can be found on this article, which is what I wrote after finishing my exam, on how I scored 5.7 in section 2 of the BMAT exam. And I think the top tips that I would do is, first, make sure you learn the content, whether this is from the Cambridge University Guide or other resources. Once you have learned the content, use these strategies by doing past papers and practice as many questions as you can. Even if you're getting them wrong, I think it's really important because you're learning a different style every single time with a different question. So practice as many as you can. Make sure that towards the end of your exam, so maybe 1.5, 2 weeks before, practice under timed conditions. This way you'll make yourself feel more confident because this is what will actually be in the exam. I believe the BMAT is an exam which many people can score really highly, but the main factor is the timing. And that's the same for the UK, I would say. So it's really important that you practice with your timing. And then finally, just make sure on the day it's perfectly fine to feel nervous, but just go in giving your best effort, and it doesn't matter what the result is, as long as you put the effort, that's the best possible outcome you can get. So hopefully this video helped you guys. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching.